volunteer something, people.
Hi.
So this is period 3, correct?
Yep.
Yeah. Let me change that right now. Thank you for telling me. 79. Thank you. Okay, so a couple of things that really fast. We'll have a quiz tomorrow. We are probably going to watch we'll start watching a video tomorrow on the American Revolution. I actually have 2 choices. I found something else. I kind of decided I want to switch. I don't know, because I've seen the other one a lot. And this is a Hopsy. That's the technical math. That's the genus and species. It's one to play with. You know where I bought it? Frog. There's this guy Frog doing it, and he was selling them. He was bouncing them off the cobblestones, and I had to have one. That's the only reason you go to Prague. Then it was the Czech Republic. Now essentially it's Czech. And Mr. Larson's wife is from it. What? Yeah. That's what they called the French settlers, Canadians. You know, there's an E there.
So that's what's called Canada.
Did it just blow you away? Yeah, these are the French settlers. We're called Canadians. Yeah, isn't that? And with the E there, yeah. So did we get to Jumonville?
Yeah.
Did we get to? Went through all those wars. Oh, by the way, what did Queen Anne tell you about? What did Queen Anne tell you about life expectancy at this time?
She had 17 kids.
Yeah, she had 17 children. What happened? Yeah, they all? No, not one lived past one. Okay. Stillborn, remember most were stillborn, or they died very young. And what did that do to the life expectancy, like the average life expectancy for people? So that kind of, so many children dying young and so many mothers dying in childbirth, that's why the life expectancy in the 1700s was like 35. But if you got to 1, the odds are you're going to live to the 60s, 70s. It's not a heck of a lot younger than today. You just had to get to 1. And that's what Queen Anne told everyone. No, not Queen Anne. And what did she keep for each? And there's all those wars for empire. What were the treaties called where they basically said we're going to, even though there's all this fighting and bloodshed, we'll go back? Yeah. And what was that term I gave you for before the war? Antebellum. And that was the era before the Civil War too. And yeah, went through all the wars. Oh, what was who had their ear cut off? Yeah, Jenkins lost an ear, and naturally there's going to be a war fought over ears. There should be more wars fought for ears. Who's telling me we're doing things in the Vietnam War, and it was a thing for soldiers to collect their enemies' ears? And I thought, ugh. Yeah. Scalps are done in both New World and Old World. And we'll get something close to that here in a second. So let's go. We get to Jumonville. Oh, what was the river valley where all the fur? Ohio. The Ohio River Valley. And what was the difference in population between the Canadians, French settlers, and British settlers? 10 to 1, 10 times more. Also, so France is feeling very desperate. Who had claims to the Ohio River Valley besides the people who lived there? French, British, and all the colonies. Who did Virginia send to get a claim? Washington, incredibly ambitious, wanting to be rich. He was that second son. What do you call it when you try? You're basically gambling that the price of something will go up. You buy low, you sell high.
Speculation.
That's speculation. We'll talk a lot about speculation. All these people trying to get rich. That would be a big issue leading up to the Constitution. Speculation, rampant speculation and borrowing to do it will help lead to crazy things like the Great Depression. And you were very young, but we had a massive economic disaster in 2007, 2008, 2009, caused by speculation. And it will happen again. So did I tell you he captured Jumonville?
Yeah.
All right, so Jumonville's captured. Did I mention that he wanted to be an English gentleman? Did I mention about the classical education? Did I mention that? Well, one thing about English gentlemen. Gentlemen had this classical education, and this is classical education really began in like 1600s. So it's 100 years old. But you're reading the classics, French, Roman classics. Did I say French? I'm sorry. Greek and Roman classics. What we call today Renaissance art. You study art, study Renaissance era architecture, even though the term Renaissance wasn't, it's still 100 years away. And so this kind of education about poetry and reading to be a gentleman. And what language did gentlemen learn by the 1700s? French. Louis XIV was French. Even though he was an imperial warlord in many ways, but he also built Versailles, and everyone copied French. In fact, that would be the language of diplomacy up until World War II. All diplomats, they all communicated together, the ambassadors in French. So, Washington did not have that classical French education, or that classical education. His parents could not afford it. They were moderate-sized plantation owners. He was educated. That had to be thrown away right at that moment, huh? Huh? Had to be thrown away at that moment, okay. So, with that, he learned how to survey, he knew math. By the way, isn't surveying good when you want to get claim to the land? That's a really important thing. He was very intelligent. He had a good command of the English language, but he didn't have that classical education. Couldn't speak French. So back to the story here. Jumonville, I talked about him being captured, right? So Jumonville is captured. And Washington wants to know, what's the French fort? It's Duquesne. I was going to say Duquesne or Fort Duquesne. He wants to know how many French and or Ottawa, Shawnee, those are tribal members, our allies of the French, the Huron. And so, imagine he's captured. They captured Jumonville. I did tell you about that at Sharp Fire. We did say that yesterday, right? Did I mention that? Is that familiar or not familiar? Oh, they attacked the people leaving the fort. A few people were killed. A few people ran away. Washington captured them and took them to this glen right here. It's now called Jumonville Glen after the commander of the French forces there. Jumonville, he was a lieutenant. And there were about 20 people. They had a couple pack animals. Actually, it was a little wagon train going up to, they were actually going up to Lake Ontario to go up to Quebec. So it was just a small unit going that way. And here's kind of a stylized painting of it. Here's a wood carving of Washington at that time. I just found that amusing and flat. Really rugged area. So think about it. The sun's starting to go down. It's dark, gloomy woods. It's hardly can see. There's a few fires flickering. They have a few men wounded. They're moaning in pain. It was kind of chaotic. There's a few prisoners being held. Some or most with their hands tied behind their back. And there's Jumonville. Hardly can see him, but on his knees. See, he's right there on his knees, like this. Washington's standing over him. Washington is like, okay, now I started a war. Now what? And he's trying to figure out how many men are in Duquesne. He's interrogating him. So he's standing over him and he's trying to get information out of him. What's the problem? Yeah. Well, what happens? Well, first off, what happens with somebody who doesn't speak a language and they're communicating with somebody who does? What's that? Yeah, they start yelling louder. And Washington was a man who could not admit he had a failing. He had character flaws. We all have character. Well, let me rephrase that. Out there, they have character flaws, not here. But he would not. He did not want his men to know that he couldn't speak French. He trying to act like a gentleman. He always was very aloof and like he was trying to be above the fray, and like I'm aristocratic. Yet he couldn't speak French, so he's just screaming at him. And what's Jumonville doing? Screaming in return in French. And they're going back and forth. And he's like, how many men? And Jumonville's talking back in French. And he's getting more and more frustrated. And everyone's it's getting more and more tense. And so we have this woods. I think I put down nothing. So Jumonville, there is a Mingo, one of the allies named Half King. Half King is standing there, and Half King's wearing what almost all the eastern tribes wore in the summer. Not much more than a loincloth. That's about it. I mean, which is actually not bad camouflage. And he's standing there watching this. He's standing there. He's getting mad. We came here to promise us loot, and you're sitting there arguing with this guy. Either let him go or get rid of him. And he can't really understand what they're yelling at anyways. It's getting more and more tense. Half King had a war club. So imagine a thick piece of wood about this long. And then tied to it is a polished stone about that big. He's standing there like this and kind of holding it out. Wouldn't it be Jumonville? Be ready. Don't look back. You don't want to know what's going on. But he's standing there beating this club like this and watching it. He's getting more and more angry. And he finally decided to, he started this argument. He decided to end the argument. And he guesses how? He walked up and in the middle of screaming, Jumonville's screaming, Half King takes his war club and, I'll use that, and bang, the back of his head. Splits his skull wide open. Blood goes everywhere. Washington is covered with blood. Skull split open. That's fatal. Jumonville falls forward. Everybody starts screaming, yeah, running around. A few people escape. A few of the French prisoners escape and run back to Fort Duquesne. They're murdering their prisoners. And in the middle of this screaming, Half King walks over the body, puts his foot on the edge of the skull, rips it open, pulls out the brain, and begins to wash himself with the brain. Washington has lost control of the situation. They were running everywhere. They went back and said, Washington is assassinated. They're torturing to death. They're butchering our prisoners. Not Washington, but the British are. Thus, we have war. And that's how it began, with the death of Jumonville. Now, Washington will later claim that Jumonville died in the fight. And he almost certainly was wounded. But he was killed, he was murdered while as a prisoner. Washington tried to cover up for himself. And you can imagine what Washington is thinking. I don't have time to run away. And the French are going to come out after me, and they might have 1,000 troops. And he has 200, or less than 200 now. And so he immediately goes and builds a little fort. He calls the fort, and you can see it right here, there is building fort necessity. If you build a fort and you dub it necessity, you're in trouble. The fort's at the bottom of the hill. This is a national park now. And so it's basically this round wooden stockade. It's tiny. And it's a terrible place to build it. It's surrounded by low hills. He built it there to cut the trees and let gravity throw them down so he could quick build it. But the French has to get on the hills and shoot down in it. And in his haste, he didn't have a water supply. There was a creek about 50 feet away, but there was no water in the stockade. And so it's a disaster. The French surround it. The French attack. Washington's men hold out for about 20 hours. There's men being wounded, men being killed, and Washington realizes he has no chance now. Now he's thinking, I mean, he can't help it. He's thinking, my ambition, it's gone. Everything I want to do is gone. If I surrender, I'll be humiliated. No officer won't get the land I think I'll get. If I fight to the death, I really won't get the land or anything. So he finally decides he has no choice. He surrenders. The French capture him, and the garrison commander, he gives them, this is the actual surrender document. He has this document, and he writes out the surrender terms. And Washington's supposed to sign it. So I'm still here. Here's surrender terms. So he wrote out the surrender terms. He gave it to Washington. And Washington goes, and then signs it. There's a signature. Washington. What's the problem? He had no idea what he was signing. No idea. He admitted that he was not there for Virginia. He was ordered by London, the Crown. And so he's admitting this is an operation to start a war. But now the worst part, he admitted that he captured Jumonville, who was not an officer. He was a diplomat on a mission of peace. Oh, that's right. And he admitted to assassinating Jumonville. Ordering the death of Jumonville. Execution would work too. Thus, admitting, he didn't know it, that this was an operation for the British to start the war. Remember, the French are looking for an excuse for a preventative strike, and this would be it. Soon, this massive worldwide war. Washington will forever be humiliated by this. And that's part of the reason why it's touchy exactly what happened, because Washington changed his story all the time. Because this is really humiliating. Thus, war. That's how the French and Indian War would start. Soon rage all over Europe. And this war would literally change everything. Not just help create the creation of the United States. It changed diplomacy in Europe. It changed the way they fought war. It changed the way they ended war. It changed the balance of power. This was one of these defining moments. The 7 Years' War or the French and Indian War. So a couple things about it really quick. 1755, before the actual 7 Years' War began, it's still the French and Indian War, the British thought, okay, we have to clean up this mess by these stupid colonials. They're a bunch of incompetent hicks who live out in the countryside and they don't know how to do anything. And that's the way Britain looked at the colonials. Just a bunch of yahoos. We're the intelligent ones and we got to clean up their mess. So they sent an experienced general, William Braddock, right here with a regiment, over 1,000 men. But here's the big thing. Washington was given a second chance. He would command some of the militia and be adjutant. So basically one of Braddock's aides. Some people call them second command. It's a little more complex than that. But one of the things about this war, these are mostly regular British soldiers, many of them experienced. Braddock fought in the War of Austrian Succession. He's a good general. But he fought in Europe. And Europe had totally different tactics and a heck of a lot different terrain than the Appalachian Mountains. The French had adopted the tactics of the various tribes. Today we would call this guerrilla. That term came about in the Napoleonic era. What type of fighting is guerrilla fighting? Yeah. Use terrain, use cover, you attack, and if a stronger force comes, what do? Yeah, you filter off into the woods. So ambush, attack, use the terrain, avoid, the British had superior cannon and more men, hit and run. This is what smaller armies do. It'd be called guerrilla when the Spaniards were fighting against the French, about 50 years after this. So, what color uniforms did the British wear? Red, mostly red. There are a few in green. Now, the colonial militia wore whatever clothes they had. And that's actually not bad because it's brown, whatever clothes they have. Well, the French dressed just like their allies. Here's a Shawnee. That's how they dressed. you know, and if you're, you know, relatively tan, that's pretty good camouflage. Red, terrible camouflage. By the way, what do we call that haircut today? Now, that's not how the Mohawks wore their hair. Paratroopers in World War II were going to use the same tactics, so they were going to act like they were American Indians. They started cutting their hair as they saw in movies in the 1940s, and they called that haircut a Mohawk because they didn't know any different. And it stuck. The Mohawks actually, at least for men, didn't have hair here. So it's like the total opposite. Oh, by the way, how did they get that haircut? You're close. You're really close. And so I'm looking around here. Okay, Tegan. Let's say you're a young man. So you're adult. You're going to prove you're adult. We're going to give you the haircut. Now, this is going to hurt. But it's for the class. It's for the kids. And it's all for children. Okay? So stand. What we do is, I would come behind and I would grab a hold of this hair. And I would yank out big humps. So it's almost like scar. Now, it doesn't have, you know, it's not like a nice haircut. What does it do? Yeah, right to the skull. So the hair doesn't grow back. Okay, grit your teeth. I'm going to bite your pencils. All right, so that's how the Mohawks cut their hair. Not that they would shave it like this, but yeah, they would rip that out. World War II, they didn't know any better. You know, they didn't know the difference between the tribes. And parachutists would also yell Geronimo when they jumped out because there literally was a movie that vaguely about Geronimo's life, and so they heard the name. So so this is pretty good camouflage, hit and run. I should add most of the painting at that time. You see paintings done 70, 80, 100 years after through today. This haircut is, it looks kind of cool. So they always draw the Eastern tribes with that haircut, even though they didn't all have that haircut. Back to this. Why did the British wear red? Exactly. They had a bunch of cheap cloth during the English Civil War, and then it was red. Yeah. And there's a warehouse full of this stuff, and they bought it all. Is anybody thinking to cover the blood? Yeah. No! Even I know people say that. That's not the reason. Why bright colors? Black powder, really smoky, much smoker. Much thicker smoke than the smokeless powder today. And what? Yeah. If we know they're red and we're fighting guys in black, with the Prussians, or at least to move because you think, yeah. That's why. So that's why they wore bright colors. Now, they fought guerrilla tactics. The British are marching off to the countryside in nice bright red uniforms. A couple more things about it. 17th century tactics, or 18th century tactics, Braddock was a master of. It had been developing since the development of firearms. It was a heck of a lot different. It was not what the French and their allies were doing. Their tactics that Braddock was a master of was to line up in a line like this, usually two abreast. You can do more than two, but the problem is if you have more than two lines firing, the third line has a nasty habit of hitting the guys in the first line. I mean, you could do it, and the French would successfully do it, but it's a lot harder. And so these guys would fire, and then these guys would fire and give them time to load. And these are British, those are Prussian. And they would line up in lines and march in their lines to about 50 yards apart. Why 50 yards apart? The weapons were that inaccurate. They were smooth bore. Now, rifles are accurate by what's called, in fact, gives them their name, rifling. They cut a little spiral in the barrel. So what happens to the bullet when it's fired? It spins. But these are muzzle loaders. You have to drop the musket ball down the barrel. If it's tight and has rifling, that means you have to kind of tap it down. So to load a rifle takes about 3 minutes, sometimes 4 minutes to load a muzzle loader. Smooth bore, you just make it a little bigger, you just drop it down, goes powder in, fire. You can load. A trained soldier can do 3 shots in a minute by that time. It's a lot more today, obviously. The problem is, what is smoothbore? What happens to the musket ball when it comes out? It's like a knuckleball. It just kind of goes everywhere. They're accurate to maybe 50 yards. Now, when I mean accurate, you could like hit a barn. So if you can't hit anything, you better all be lined up and shooting together. So if you have an entire regiment or a company of 100 men shooting together, you're going to hit something, right? Does that make sense? So that's why they use those weapons. Rifled muskets didn't use. They didn't have rifled muskets that worked until 1850s for combat. For hunting, they weren't. And so they march at 50 yards, and you start blazing away to each other's face. And that's what you're doing. Well, not face. You just kind of point at them and hope for the best. You can't really aim these things. 50 yards, you can see their face. You can see their eyes. They can see yours. And black powder, the bullets don't go as fast. So you can literally almost see them. You see kind of a vision go by your head. It's pretty scary. And that's how they fought. When one side would begin to waver, they would charge, and they would turn their musket into a pike. You can see it right there. What is that? What they would add to it to make a musket, a bayonet. Now, people don't like to get stuck with pikes, so usually you do it when the enemy's about ready to run, and you attack. And these are bloody, horrible things. You stop the fight. Now, it's a heck of a lot more deadly and bloody today, but it's also, you're not 50 yards apart. That's the combat then. What do you need to form lines like this? Huh? Not just training, just even, let's assume both sides have training. What do you need to form a line like that? Open field, and then you can mark your formations in it. You don't have that in the mountains. Braddock's men are trained to fight like this. Do you see the problem they're going to have? They're marching down a path that's a little bit wider than my arms extend. Trees and mountains on either side. They can't line up. They're trained to fight the wrong war. They're in real trouble. And this is going to happen time after time after time in history. Armies might be trained to be the best in the world at fighting one type of fighting, and they have to fight another type. You might have heard of a place called Vietnam. You might have heard of a place called Afghanistan. You might have heard of a place called Iraq. American forces were trained to fight one type of war, and they had to fight a different type, and really struggled and lost. Not because of the men were not brave or anything, just one type of war. So here's actually the lineup in fighting, and these are a number of different battles, but we're coming up to the Battle of the Monongahela. And that was one of the tributaries that made up the Ohio. The Monongahela and the Allegheny. And these paintings, a little bit bigger, this is trying to show the British rallying. Here are attacks by there's Shawnees, there are Ottawas, there are Hurons, there's French, there's some actual French soldiers from France and Canadians. And they're all would come in out of the woods, they attacked and ran back. Now, think about a little bit wider than my arms. About 1,400 British soldiers and militia are marching down path this wide. How long is that line going to be? At most, 2 abreast, usually 1 abreast. How long will that line stay at 1,500 men and pack animals? It's going to be a couple miles stretched through the forest. And so the French and the Shawnee, Ottawa just attacked, ran back in the woods. The British couldn't form up. It was a disaster of unmitigated terms. A third of the British soldiers were killed, including General Braddock. An absolute humiliating disaster. Ironically, Washington would organize a rear guard, and because he had fought this type of battle, he warned Braddock, don't march into the woods. And Braddock, of course, thought Washington was a what? Yeah, you're an idiot. You're a dumb colonial. You don't know anything. Why would I trust you? We're tired of bailing you out. And so he formed a rear guard. That's actually Washington forming the rear guard. He probably was not on his horse. But nobody gets credit for a loss. Washington assumed people would acknowledge how well I did. He never got commissioned in the British Army. He would fight along the frontier in Virginia militia for the rest of the war, but he was furious. He felt slighted. And there's nothing more dangerous than somebody who feels slighted, who feels they're not getting the respect they deserve. Because what happens if you're slighted? How does that make you feel? And builds. This resentment builds, and his hatred of the British is going to grow. Yeah, there's nothing more dangerous than somebody who feels like humiliated and slighted. They are the most dangerous type of people. So now it's going to rage next year, the 7 Years' War. And soon, France is going to be fighting Prussia. So France is going to be occupied in Europe, fighting against one of the greatest military minds in history, a guy you might have heard of named Frederick the Great. And even though his armies were outnumbered, he outmaneuvered bigger French, Austrian, and Russian forces. And so now France is occupied here. So Britain can now attack on the periphery. So unbelievably huge battles are being fought here. And now the British can focus on North America because the French are occupied and can't get there because of the Royal Navy. Well, starting in this century, Parliament started gaining more and more supremacy, or in the last 2 centuries, supremacy. Whoever held the majority of supporters in Parliament would soon be dubbed PM or Prime Minister. Today, whoever has the majority party. This is pre-political party stuff. The Prime Minister was William Pitt, and he organized the victory. He organized the victory by, we'll funnel money to Prussia so they can fight the French, and then we can pick off French colonies. They picked off massive victories in India, victories in South Africa, and the biggie, of course, from our point of view, the Americas. The Prime Minister does all the executive functions. He's the one who runs the government, and the Prime Minister of Britain is a member of Parliament. Has everyone got that? That is not the government the United States has. The United States, the legislature, is separate from the executive. In a parliamentary system, the executive is a member of the legislature. What system do most countries who have something like a democracy operate? A system like the United States or a system like Britain? Yeah, nobody does. They look at America and like, no, we're not doing that. That's a mess. We obviously do, but it's really hard to get anything passed in the United States. It's really hard to get something through Congress. That was done on purpose, but now it's become a point where now we have done kind of some amazing things, but this much easier to get passed. How do you do it? How did he do it? Bonds. They borrowed money like mad. Bonds are when countries borrow money. Bonds. They ran up a bunch of debt, and he figured after the war we'll pay it back. Right now, who cares? We'll worry about it after the war. So a bond is this. Businesses do this too, but governments, they loan money by issuing bonds. So they come up with a bond with whatever amount they have, $100, whatever it might be. And they say, they put them up for sale, and people buy these bonds. So they buy it. So I put up bonds, people buy them, the government gets $100. That's how the government is loaned money. And then when the bond, the word is matures. When the bond gets to a certain age, it could be 3 months, it could be 30 years, it could be 6 months, anything between. In the US, we have 3 month, 9 month, 12 month, 5 year, 10 year, 30 year. In the library here at Capitol, that wing was constructed about 20 years ago. And they use bonds, and they're just maturing now. So we buy them. Why would anybody loan the government money, aka buy a bond? And they, not only they pay it back, the insurance, they go pay it back, but they value the bond back plus what? Interest. And that's what we have to get down. I wrote it right here. Interest. They give a little bit of interest. So you make a profit. It is a good investment. So let's say you have a big pile of money. Who has a big pile of money? Who has $1 million just burning a hole in their pocket? That's a problem a lot of you have, right? I got this $1 million. You keep it in the pocket. It's not very safe, is it? Especially now that you've told me. You might get rolled in the hallway. But I've witnessed muggings. I didn't do it, but I witnessed them. No. Or they might go up in value if you have deflation, but they might go down if there's inflation. But if you invest in something like a bond, it's more secure. Does that make sense? In fact, that's why they call stocks and bonds securities. We will come back to that. So people invest plus interest. And so that's how they did it. One more thing about this. Governments can't function unless they can borrow money. Here, it doesn't happen. You don't have a government, it falls apart. Let's say you believe that the government, let's say the British government, or say the American government, can't collect taxes. And they're on the edge of failure. Would you loan them money? Or they're at war and they might lose. Would you loan them money? How does a country get people to borrow money if they don't trust you? What do they do? Meaning, what do they do with the interest rates? They give you more interest back, which means the government has to pay back more money. If the government is secure and people trust it, it's low interest. If they don't trust it, it's high interest. This is why there's a United States. Bond rates. This is the reason the United States entered World War I. Bonds. What do we call American bonds today? By the way, you notice I am connected to things. And you're thinking, this is bonds, what does that have to do with anything? No, this is everything. Bonds are the most secure investment in the world if the country's safe. American bonds are called T-bills or treasury bills. Now, if you did not know this, that's perfectly fine. But as I told you before, it's now time to know things. It's time. You gotta know stuff. If you didn't know this, you gotta know. It's T-bills, treasury bills. Is the interest rates for American treasury bills high or low? Is it low, meaning people trust the US will pay it back, or is it high? People are thinking, pretty low, very low. One of the lowest in the world. Yeah, and what's happened to Ukraine's interest rates? Yeah, they're skyrocketing. And US is really low because the United States has always paid it back in stamps. But at this moment, the House of Representatives, Republicans in the House of Representatives will not pass a budget. And if they don't pass a budget, the government will shut down. Now, I know we're passing gum around over there, but did you hear that? The government is about ready to shut down in the United States. And if the government shuts down the United States, that would lead to what? A disaster of unmitigated proportions. Meaning, what's going to happen to our interest rates? Yeah, this and our value of our dollar could go down. This could be an unprecedented disaster. They almost certainly won't get to that, but they're playing with fire right now. And so we're at actually a really dangerous time of debt at this moment. If the government shuts down, it could be really bad. It shut down a few times, but it wasn't long term. But it's kind of things where like all of a sudden everything becomes more expensive. This is the time when you have no plans, do you, for the future? No, it makes it more difficult to plan for the future. I mean, this is playing with fire right now. President Biden's a Democrat. Republicans in the House are kind of in disarray. And so, yeah. So, that's my bond story. And you notice what I'm trying to do? I'm trying to connect these issues from the past to today. This is not like isolated little trivia bits that happen and who cares. No, we see the same things happen about bond and debt time after time. How do you think the United States won World War II? Bonds. We taxed heavily and bonds. The highest marginal income tax rate went to 93%. and we bought. I'll tell you how that works. Nobody paid 93%.
Like, there was an extreme push and
I-
so like patriotism meant that people were more willing to just step up, like.
Sure, but you still have to make it good. So, the French then, they're stuck in Europe. Now their plan is, here, hold out. They even evacuated Fort Duquesne and blew it up with gunpowder. Because in 1758, they couldn't hold it anymore. And now, if they can win in Europe, there'll be a status quo treaty and they can hold Europe. And so now the British are going to try to take Quebec. The British rolled in to the destroyed fort and built a new fort. And named it after the prime minister. It became Fort what? And a town developed around there. And what's that town? Yeah, Cleveland. Cleveland, Ohio. It's Pittsburgh. William Pitt, Fort Pitt, Pittsburgh. That's how the name Pittsburgh came. And so with that, we're coming up to the Battle of Quebec. The British decide if we can take the capital of New France, one quick resounding victory, when they do have a treaty negotiation, it'll be much harder to have status quo antebellum. We can't just take a couple forts. We got to take Quebec. The problem with Quebec is they have to sail up a river in ocean-going sailing vessels. That means they got to be really good with the sails and tack up the river. And sometimes men are going to have to get out in rowboats and pull the boats. Can you imagine the hell of that in a mile-wide river? So it's going to take months. So they're not going to get to Quebec until the end of August. What's the problem with the end of August in Canada? It's going to be miserably cold and they're stuck. They have one shot. The other problem is this, Quebec. Has anyone ever been to Quebec? It's a beautiful town and the French built it as a fort. It's on high cliffs in this little peninsula, and so they can make a wall here, walled city here. There are anywhere from 40 to 100 foot high cliffs for miles down the river, and this is all swamp. So the British, when they finally get to here, they can't land anywhere. Wolfe eventually lands down here on a little cove, but there's 40, 50 foot cliffs above him. Men individually can go up, but carrying gear and cannon, and all the French have to do is wait. The British commander, James Wolfe. Now there's Wolfe right here, and he's mid-30s, so this is getting to the awkward age of portraits. This is the golden age of portraits. And they always draw people. You remember, they want them to look good. That was looking good there. Noses are kind of hard to draw, so you might notice portraits where they have kind of bigger noses than normal. Also, hands are really busy to draw, or really hard to draw, so they don't show hands. If anyone's ever tried to draw a hand, they're really hard to draw. Let me rephrase that. They're hard to draw well. We can all draw a hand, but portrait painting. And I'll remind you of this and show you more portraits. Before, when they draw people before the age, mid-30s, earlier, like 20s, 10, everybody they draw looks like a 12 to 13-year-old girl. Male or female, that's how they draw. They clean up the faces and you look, oh, that's a junior high age girl. That's an 8th grader. No, it's someone in their 30s. Anybody older than that, they make them look like a senior citizen age. It's always like a woman because they try to soften the features, and that's how they draw. So here's Louis Montcalm, the commander of the French. Wolfe is one of the greatest British commanders ever. Montcalm, a good political general, not necessarily a genius in battle. And they both know, in fact, all Montcalm has to do is hold out for winter. Just stay in the fort till winter. The British have got to leave. The St. Lawrence froze up completely back then. Does it now? It's a lot warmer now. Well, they were in the middle of the mini ice age, but so it's even cooler then. Here are the cliffs near Wolfe's Cove where it landed. Here's the fort. Well, something happened. It was a very weird little thing. The British are there. It's early September. It's getting colder, and they're trying to find a place to get up the cliffs. Some pickets, scouts, noticed women from the a little French village above were coming down the cliff and washing their clothes in the water of the St. Lawrence River and then getting back up the cliff, carrying stuff. And they couldn't see how they did it. And one foggy morning, this is about the 9th of September, 1859, a few pickets saw the women, and in the fog, looked like they were floating down. But they actually saw where they were coming down. What were they? Witches. No, they're just floating down. They weren't witches. They noted where they went back up, and they saw a mountain goat trail along this one. And they couldn't see it unless they were on top of it. And it'll switch back its way up. And it must have been widened a little bit as French went down, up and down it. And when Wolfe heard that, he ordered his entire army up that little trail. And the men were angry. Boy, did they want to get the French. French soldiers were on the top of the cliff, yelling insults at them. They couldn't do anything and dropping feces on them, throwing at them. And they got to get on. And so that night, he sent 4,400 men up that cliff. And they pulled, so a few men went up and they dropped torches down by ropes. But even then, it had to be dark and awful. And they used little pulleys to pull up the horses in the cannon, which was a fun ride. And I always imagine pitch black, men with gear, and there's a cliff, you have this long of a footpath, and just kind of going up like this, all the way up. The next morning, 4,400 men were in the plains, called the Plains of Abraham, in front of Quebec. Montcalm was like, they weren't supposed to be here. That's the Battle of Quebec. Here is a kind of stylized picture of them pulling themselves up. Kind of an amazing thing that happened. There were 4,400 British soldiers, 3,400 French, but half of the French soldiers were militia. Montcalm should never have left this fort, but he decided if I can win just even a small victory, they have to be exhausted. They couldn't have their heavy gear. Win a victory here, it's over. You gotta just wait until it dropped to 40 below. Now think about militia. I want everyone to imagine you're standing in the line now. This is going to be a traditional European style battle. There's a big plains, they can make their lines, the British are so happy. You're in your line. You're 50 yards away from the enemy. And black powder, has anyone ever heard of black powder musket fire? They are so much more, or so much louder than a smokeless rifle, which is really loud. But they're 50 yards away. You can see them. They're firing, it looks like they're firing right at your face. What would a rational human being do if there are 50 men firing at your face? Yeah, right? No, I'm going. Militia were just farmers, blacksmiths, whatever. They weren't trained soldiers. Militia in those type of battles always did rational things. They ran. How do you convince someone to stand and have let someone else shoot them at their face? And by the way, patriotism and that kind of thing, first off, no. Yeah, yo, go America, you shoot at my face, I wish you all the luck in the world. How do you do it?
You punish them with their
You beat them into submission. Hey, is anybody, if you join the armed forces, what do they have everyone do for 10 weeks? Yeah, why do they do that? To knock your rationality out of you so you take it. Say it again. Yeah, they break you completely and then build you up into somebody who will not, okay, you might still run, but maybe not as fast. Goodbye, everybody. Yeah.
The things I needed to do.
What dates were you going out?
Friday, Monday.
Typical.
No.
So I signed base all chapter. So I did the quick on chapter 3 on Monday.
Okay.
And then I signed out reading. And then I had so much. That's it.
What was the reading?
147 and 166.
Okay.
And even though I actually just typed in teams, I at least try to get the right assignment in teams.
And that's just reading, no notes or anything?
We had a ton of notes.
Ton of notes.
Ton.
Oh, okay, okay.
I'll be gone on, Friday and Monday.
Why?
My cousin's wedding,
Yeah, where are you going? Where you at?
Wisconsin.
You go to beautiful Wisconsin?
I
Ooh.
know, lucky me,
Driving or flying?
fine.
You
So,
don't get driver's license from Florida? Oh.
I know, my sister actually goes to school down there, so I've seen enough.
So I'm gonna start chapter 4. I'm also gonna send a declaration of independence for Tuesday.
Okay.
It's in the appendix. Back of the book.
Right.
And the big thing is, it's actually really short documents, in the first 3 paragraphs.
Yes.
You got that right.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah, read them, and then on your own, you have to think about them, what is the purpose, why is it wrong? And think about, remember we talked about reading a document, you know, think about background, context.
Okay.
And I am gonna assign, so the rest, it'd be the rest of chapter 4.
Okay, after, 1.
Yes.
Okay.
Sound
Sounds
good?
good.
But I'll see you tomorrow, right?
Yes.
All right. I gotta shut the camera off, and then I gotta run out in the hallway. I got so much work to do. I got work to do.